some of our next steps and get your input before we go public with that. This is another one of those joint working group meetings where we've got all of you together. I think that'll facilitate a little bit of interaction, but we are later, as I'll describe, going to break out into some breakout groups and focus on some particular areas. But I think just to start, I'm going to share my screen here and walk us through kind of where we are in the process. So I think we might have showed this to you in the first meeting. We're moving our way through really an aggressive master planning process with the goal of having a framework master plan in place this summer. The first phase was kind of scoping, looking at constraints, opportunities at the site, gathering information, and we've completed that phase of this planning process. You'll hear about some of our findings and what we've learned from that later. We're right now in what I consider to be a very critical phase, and it's taking a lot of thought and effort. But the idea is that we are taking the information that we've gathered over the last couple of months, the technical information, but we're also bringing in all of the public input that we've heard over the last 4 or 5 years, particularly the input from these working groups to develop 3 scenarios for how this site might develop. And I will emphasize, none of the scenarios that you see today is what the final plan is going to look like. This is an analytical step in the process that allows us to explore different ideas, explore different combinations of land uses and transportation models, and see how they perform. And we're going to take the best elements from these scenarios and kind of put them together in that next phase, where we'll develop a preferred alternative. That'll be based on input we receive on these scenarios. And I will tell you that over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be reaching out extensively to the public. We've got in about a week and a half, we'll release a survey that will be scientifically fielded to gather input on the concepts in those plans. That same week, we've got an open house for members of the public to participate virtually and see the ideas, ask questions, provide their input. And we'll be involving our board, the input from you today. So it's going to be a pretty involved process to take complex plans out and get good, meaningful input leading into that next phase of developing a preferred alternative. We're going to then take that alternative and start working it. We're going to turn the dials and see if we can make it function better, make sure that we fine tune it to the point where we get the best traffic outputs we can, the best sustainability outputs we can, best economic outputs, et cetera. All of that will go to the creation of kind of the final plan, and we'll put that together with the supporting documents, and that'll be released this summer. You're going to be involved a couple more times along the way. We've got meetings scheduled with each of the working groups separately the week of March 22nd. I think you've received invitations for those. We'll have you look in more detail at these scenarios with some of the public input and help provide input based on your areas of focus and expertise. We'll be meeting with you again late in April to help put together this preferred alternative. So we're looking forward to those conversations. Let me, it's not letting me out of here. So let's do this. I'm going to go now to our agenda for today and talk about what we're going to try to accomplish. You receive this. We're going to turn, after I wrap up here, to our planning team led by SOM. I'll give you a little background on where we've been over the last month, some of the things that we've learned, some of the data we've gathered. Then we're going to give you a bit of a look under the hood. And Aaron Talkington from RCLCO will talk about the analysis that's gone into these scenarios that you'll see. We don't just start with a blank slate and start putting buildings around and drawing pretty pictures. Really have to understand what the market can bear, what concepts will work, what mix of uses will be appropriate at this site. So Aaron will kind of talk about some of those nitty gritty pieces that lead to the concepts you'll see. And SOM will share those concepts. They'll also be working with you on the key vision elements. You might recall that last summer and early fall, you were very much involved in identifying key themes and ideas that you thought should be included in our planning. Those were translated into key vision elements, which are broad statements of those goals. We've broken those down into some principles and are now going to seek your input on real implementation items, specific ways that we can implement and reflect those broader principles and goals. So we'll break out into groups based on subject matter area. You'll be able to select the one that you want to participate in. We'll give you instructions on that a little bit later. We'll report out at the end and then wrap up. So a lot to cover. Any comments or questions before we move on? Okay, I'm going to turn it to our friends at SOM. I think, Peter, are you going to lead this and maybe give us a little update on where we are and where we've come from in the last few weeks?
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Appreciate it. And I'd like to just say, great to see everybody again. My name is Peter Kindle. I'm the project director for Skid Moorings and Merrill. We do have a number of our team members here. I won't introduce them all right now, but we're excited to facilitate this part of the process. And as Alan said, we've made substantial progress over the last several weeks. We're in week 7 of the schedule and have done a lot. So we'll give you a very brief overview of that. And if you can see my screen, I just wanted to first just go through a few quick things. I think everybody, of course, knows where the site is. I'm going to move through these quite quickly. We have been conducting a series of public outreach meetings with all of the neighboring communities and many of the neighboring landowners. Some of the principles I think you remember about the project. One is this idea of the site as a connector for the communities. Water conservation is a key principle. Connectivity is something I think that's important that you've identified in the working groups. One of the key ideas we started with is this idea of walkability and mixed use, really creating a model development here that represents this idea of a 15-minute city or with many uses. One of the concepts that has stayed with us, and you'll see this in the alternatives, is this idea of sub-districts on the site. The site is quite big. And so all the schemes that we're doing, all the alternatives that we're currently working on are based on this idea of smaller districts. We have concluded our research phase, or we're in the process of concluding it. One of the key things is we looked at a series of analog projects. These are 10 projects around the globe, predominantly the US, but we did look at a couple foreign projects. So I just wanted to talk about the 8 key takeaways that we learned from these projects. And we divided the takeaways into really 4, there's 12. 6 around innovation, what we called innovation catalysts, and then 6 around just general catalysts for the project. So here you see the the three key takeaways around innovation, this idea of an institutional anchor, a unique physical environment, so differentiation in terms of the physical environment. One of the things we're seeing over and over again is a highly amenitized public space that anchors and centralizes the project. Other ones that we learned around innovation was this idea of an adaptable urban plan. So something that allows for transformation and change over time. Building typologies with flexible floor plates. So a key part of innovation is having the flexibility in a building system to change and modify the space depending on what research is going on. And then this number 6, this idea of public-private and institutional partnership. So bringing more people to the table. I think these are all ideas that I'm sure have been talked about in the working groups before, but it's good to see these verified through external projects. Some of the general catalysts for the projects that we learned. One is early completion of a signature element. So some element of the plan that comes in early that sets the tone for the project. The other important one is a balanced mix of land uses. So this creates a environment that's attractive to innovation and tech workers. So this idea of a mix of land uses. And then world-class public space. A threshold density, so a density that allows the project to have a real critical mass is quite important, and then connectivity to transit, and then walkability. Many of the most innovative projects and the ones that really took off are ones that de-emphasize the automobile and really move to a more walkable community. Just to conclude the data overview, we have conducted a pretty extensive GIS analysis of the region, and some of the things we're learning are about the gaps in the network here. As of course, as a prison site, the site has been excluded from many of the community growth parameters. So job density is something we want to increase. The housing mix is not that diverse, so we want to extend and advance the housing mix on the site. The general residential typologies and in terms of density also is a little bit low on the site. So we want to increase both density and diversity of housing types. And then another component of the program that we'll talk about a lot is food and beverage offerings and retail offerings in and around the area. So this area is a little bit lacking in terms of strong sub-regional attractions around the retail space, and I think Aaron will talk to that. And then another program element we've been working with is cultural assets that are close by. We see the site as part of the community vision, really having a cultural component, civic and cultural. Maybe that's around family-focused amenities and entertainment items. And then the last couple really are to do with schools. We're anticipating a population on the site of somewhere between 10 and potentially up to 13,000 people. We've been in discussions with different school districts, and they are indicating and very enthused about potentially some type of school on the site. So we've summarized those takeaways here as part of the process. And really the last piece of our analytical efforts is really to circle back around with the working groups and come up with some initiatives and principles that you feel are important to have on the site. And Alan mentioned that. I'd like to just take a moment, Alan, and switch to RCLCO's report. So we'd be happy to take any questions right now about where we are.
Any questions at this point on kind of what we've been doing the last month or so? All right, then we'll jump in and turn to Aaron. Aaron is on a cross-country drive right now. So, Aaron, I hope you're in a place where you've got cell coverage.
I've got her slides here, so I'll flip to those. Can you see the blue slide that says economic models?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Great. Well, thank you, Peter and Alan. And based on the fact that I'm in the car, I'm not going to join you all in video today. So I hope you can remember what I look like from past meetings. But we'll go ahead and jump in. Our SealCo's role in this project has been really multifaceted. If we look to the next slide, one of the main things that we've been focused on, in addition to understanding some of the economic development and innovation characteristics, is to really get a strong grounding in what the market can support as a site. And that's not to say we're just going to look backwards or look at what's there today to understand the opportunities, but we're really focused on forecasting forward, thinking about how the region and the demographics of the location are likely to change. And so that really allows us to make some recommendations around what types of buildings are feasible, what the best options in terms of the mix of different types of residential are, and to translate that into the mix of different product types that fit together in a way that makes sense for different concepts. Great, there we go. And so this is just an example of some of the detailed demand forecasting that we've done to understand what the potential opportunity might be for different product types. So this is, just looking at office, but our goal is really, not to limit ourselves to thinking about what, the amount of activity that we've seen happen or that we've seen happen nearby, and think really broadly about the opportunity in the region, how the site might change it, how demand for different product types like office and retail is changing as we see the industries evolve. So for sure, if we've done a retail demand or a retail analysis, 5 or 10 years ago, the types of tenants and the opportunities that we would see are going to look different than what we see today, based on what we know now about forecasts around online spending and other pieces. And so, we translate that into understanding, how we might think about the ways in which the site can capture some of that demand. And I think it's worth saying that there's a variety of ways in which the site might participate in the market. And this baseline idea, right, is really recognizing the idea that the state could decide to sell the land and have somebody else do this. And in that case, what you would see in the market and at the site is very similar to what you see around it. We're not planning on that scenario. We think it's important to understand, but it's not the basis for the programs that we're about to show you, because the state's involvement and long-term vision, as well as its mandate to look for economic development and innovation opportunities and provide for the public and community good, position us to do something different. And there's a range of market opportunities, somewhere between capturing a greater amount of activity in the region than we would have otherwise, and progressing all the way to if we really create this ecosystem of innovation, we're going to meaningfully change the demand and pricing dynamics, which means we might capture some higher density development at the site than what we see today, or even what we might imagine. And so I don't expect anybody to be reading this table in detail, but I do want you to know that underneath all of the programs you're about to see are some really detailed conclusions about the amount of demand that's supportable, the annual absorption, what we think the supportable rents or prices might be for different product types. And we were using this as our kind of menu of options, our kit of parts, because if you look at any one of these lines, especially the single family, there's far more development in this table than what we would actually build at the site based on the available acres. And so this is kind of our kit that we get to pull from as we think about how these different concepts come together. And this also feeds into some preliminary financial modeling that we're about to make much more detailed, as we get a little bit further into the planning process with SOM. and have some better cost data. But what we've really learned is that the economic plan and the physical plan need to work for moderate density development, 4 to 7 stories. But we also need to plan in a way that allows us to increase the density, if and when the market dictates. And we think that, we're really excited about some of the scenarios that we're starting to look at, and that there are going to be opportunities to increase density over time. But we want to make sure that we're designing a development that really allows us to have some flexibility going forward and respond to the ways in which we change the market. And so working with SOM and with Steve and with Alan, I think you've heard about these 3 concepts for the different plans at this point. The first one we've described as this complete community. And so this is really where we marry up these ideas of the concept in the market to think about what that means in terms of the mix of residential and commercial, some of the specific concepts underneath that, how do we mix the different types of residential, what type of retail makes sense here. So in this first scenario, you can see that, we're really building a substantial amount of development. It's pretty spread in terms of the residential options, right? This is a scenario in which we're trying to provide a little bit of something for everybody to serve the broader demand pool. We're really just focusing the retail on the niche generated by site itself, which is a pretty modest amount of overall retail. And that, we are comparing this against the projected absorption for the site in different scenarios to make sure that we understand what that means in terms of a build out and an absorption timeline going forward. So this next scenario, thinks a little bit broader about the opportunities for the site rather than just looking at what would make sense in a complete community, right? Within our immediate area, we're really thinking about a little bit broader sub-regional hub. How do we serve some gaps, that you don't necessarily see in the surrounding area, like Pete mentioned. In this case, specifically, we're focused on the fact that there aren't necessarily destination, retail uses or higher value or higher quality food options. So in this scenario, we're really planning for this entertainment destination that would allow and attract residents and employees from the broader area. And so I think some of the comments come up on the bottom. Workforce attached, in this case, we've added an additional product type to reflect that, we know for serving the broader area, there is an affordable housing need. And so, this workforce attached is actually slightly, lower rent, probably garden style products that we think would be important to provide at the site to serve a broader mix of the workforce that we think we manufacture. And in this case, more of the housing is also higher density. And so looking at the economic core scenario, which is the third scenario, this is truly trying to see what happens if we try to maximize the economic development opportunities and push for something that might look and feel like a new downtown. So what that really means is that we've cranked up the commercial, specifically the office. We've actually scaled back the retail a little bit from that second scenario to provide amenities and be really attractive for the users we'd like to have on site that in downtown feel and that we think will work for the innovation tenants we'd like to have here, but not necessarily to try to go above and beyond in terms of attracting extra entertainment users that we think are market feasible, but don't necessarily need to be located here in this scenario. And in this case for housing, that means that we're primarily focused on multifamily housing. But the one unique thing you'll see here is we set aside far more acres in this particular scenario for a specific university or campus or other anchor institution. That could be any wide variety of things. We're not trying to put a particular focus on it today, other than to say that we think it's an important component of the site and that we need to set aside a portion of the program that otherwise might have been market-driven to really meet that need. And so with that, I'm happy to pass it back to Pete or to take any questions.
Great, thank you, Aaron.
Right. Yeah, Aaron, thanks very much. We do have a question that's been typed in. First is, have you projected potential reductions in office need as a result of COVID?
Yes, we have incorporated a long-term reduction in office space into our model. And so, we've looked at this in a few other scenarios and a few other sites too to understand the impact of COVID. Given that, as much as we know, virtual environments are here to stay, we don't actually know how that's going to affect companies' footprint, right? Can they really take less space, compared to what they had before? And so we've worked through some scenarios and we've used what we think is an appropriate middle ground in the modeling here.
Any other questions on what Aaron presented? As I said, it's kind of a look under the hood, just to emphasize.
I've got a question. If this is a good time for it, the new communities I am familiar with, or sometimes they're called new towns, are usually like Rancho Santa Margarita and Baldwin Park in Winter Park, Florida, Rancho Santa Margarita in Orange County, California, Orenco Station. They become attractions for people living in residential subdivisions that don't have amenities themselves for those residential subdivisions that are around them. And it seemed to me that your scenario number 2, at least if I understood you correctly, is doing exactly that. It will become a gathering place for the people who live in these, homogeneous neighborhoods of Draper or Bluffdale or whatever. Is that the purpose of 2, that it become a kind of a population serving commercial area for the communities around it?
Yeah, Reed.
Yeah, I think that's a good description.
Yeah. Hey, Reed, how's it going? Steve Kellenberg here.
Oh, hey, Steve, how are you? Sorry I'm late. You have a beard now.
Yeah, and a number of changes, which we won't go into, but that's exactly what number 2 is. The idea is to have one of the schemes that is looking out a little farther and sort of looking at things that might be underserved in terms of retail, entertainment, cultural, parkland, and have that as a bit of an option to be evaluating. And so the retail program there is significantly greater because it's picking up on community and entertainment retail that isn't necessarily provided in the area, versus the other schemes are really focused more closer to home, shall we say, and are aligned with some other emphasizing different goals.
Yeah. Well, you worked on Rancho Santa Margarita. You may have been the lead planner, and the way it was positioned within the communities around it as a place you could go to a power center or a main street or a community shopping center if you lived in Costa de Casa or in Mission Viejo or whatever. That seems like a good model to me, given my limited knowledge of the communities in that general area, Taylorsville, etc., that they really do need a place to go to do shopping and entertainment.
That's the idea on this particular scheme. The way that now, in doing so, we make trade-offs. We generate a little bit more traffic, and if we use land that could be used for other things. So all of these have trade-offs, but that is the general idea on that.
Thank you for that question, Reed. You're perceptive as always. So, and any other questions quickly for Aaron before we move on? Soren, looks like you've got a question.
Yeah, just looking at these scenarios, and by the way, the presentation today so far has been really fantastic, great research and background. It seems like in looking at these scenarios that you've presented on the current slide, a lot of that is really contingent on,
Jesus, I should have, but I assume there have been market studies done to support each of these scenarios.
Yes, we talked about that. As Aaron said, she's done market studies. We've developed a program that's being reflected in each of these. And Soren, sorry, you were talking there. We didn't mean to interrupt.
No worries. Did we get all of Reed's questions answered?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. I was just commenting that, it seems to me, in a lot of the work that I've done around the transit system in the region, that some decisions about this, local complete community versus a regional or innovation center may have to do with the kinds of transit connections that you could make. I know the western boundary of this site is the commuter rail line, but there's not a commuter rail station at this location. And so if we're relying on systems like BRT and really localized transit systems that are connecting to a regional system that might be a mile or two away, that would be a very different outcome than, say, having a commuter rail stop right in the, kind of at the edge of this innovation district. In other words, in order to do this kind of regional draw that may be 20 or 30 miles or more as an innovation center, you really do need a regional connection with the commuter rail line, which looks like from the legislature is also going to be getting an upgrade sometime in the near future. And maybe part of that upgrade is thinking about having a commuter rail stop here, like the one they're adding in Vineyard right now. I know that's not planned as part of this system, but the kinds of densities and the kinds of future market here exceeds most of the commuter rail stations that already exist. And that really ought to be on the table as one of the innovative connectivity decisions that should be made in order to determine whether this is more of a local kind of walkable community or really a regional destination that really needs all of the regional connections, including a commuter rail stop.
You can see Soren's background as a really successful planner. Thanks, Soren. Those are terrific thoughts. And we have had a number of conversations with UTA about the potential for commuter rail stop. I think at this point, they're resistant for, I think the primary reason is that they're trying to keep stations at least 5 miles apart. And this is less than a mile from another station. So don't want to slow it down, but those are things that we're looking at long-term. And in fact, the planning team has been looking at concepts that could accommodate a future stop if it became appropriate. I might suggest that we haven't even gone into what these scenarios are yet. And our next step in this program today is to explain in some detail what the scenarios are and how they play out. And they may answer some of your questions, but there are a couple that are here now. Let's see. I saw Jeff and Donna both had one. Did you want to ask it now or just wait?
Yeah, I'll just ask it quickly. Well, Donna, do you want to go ahead first, please?
Yeah, I'll wait. I think mine might be answered.
Okay, mine was just related to the anchor tenant. It sounded like there was a bit of a decision made that would be an educational anchor. At one point, we were talking both about educational options and potentially like a company option. Has that been further settled since our last conversation? Just curious about that. Thanks.
It is not. We're talking about an institutional anchor in a generic sense and think that it could be academic, industrial, office, whatever it is, that's still open, probably a combination of various institutions, including.
Great. I like that. Yep. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Peter, maybe we'll turn it to you and we can run through what these scenarios are and how they've been developed over time, and then have some
Yeah.
more discussion.
Thanks, Alan. I'm going to turn my video off just to increase my bandwidth here. So as you heard from Aaron, we do have these three scenarios. There are some qualitative and quantitative differences to them. I'll articulate those as we get into them. I'll just try and give you about 5 minutes on each one. So what we're calling the complete community is really based on this idea of what would be the most appropriate development scenario to meet the immediate surrounding needs. And we're looking at about a 1 to 2 mile radius from the site. And I touched on that a little bit with the GIS mapping. And then really reconnecting this to the community. So with that in mind, we have taken your key vision elements and begun to articulate simple sort of visioning statements around each of the KVEs, which you can see here. And I think the real takeaway for the complete community idea is this notion that it is a true live work environment. So we would make a commitment to housing here, as well as innovation and commercial development. That's really the underlying concept behind complete community. The way we've approached the complete community is to break the site into a series of smaller districts that are interconnected by a more linear open space system. And these, what we're calling the green necklace. So there would be 6 districts in the project, organized around this central hub, which would act as a real mixed use core. The developable area in this scenario is 55% of the total site area, with open space at 25%. The land use program for the complete community is the most heavily oriented towards residential of the 3 options. And that, we have discovered, not only reduces off-site car trips, but it also allows people to meet their needs in the project most effectively. The blue is generally office, and there's no institution in this scheme, but it's office and what we're calling innovation office. So that might be an office type that has a specific innovation focus. Those are mostly focused on the east side of the project, and the residential would be more on the west side of the project. The central hub area would be a mixed use concept. And then complementing these would be sub-cores or little retail hubs that are nested inside of the districts that serve the businesses that are there, that serve the workers that are there. And then each neighborhood would have a small little retail hub. Again, all within easy walking distance of all the development parcels, 3 to 5 minutes. The open space framework for this is centered around what we're calling bike and pedestrian corridor. And Soren, this addresses the question you had just asked, is if in the future there is a frontliner station here, front-runner station, we could design the project to connect right into that. So you could get off that train, get into the pedestrian corridor, and actually walk through the entire project and get to every district without having to drive. So that was the concept here. All of the schemes were in the process of developing the road network, which you can see here in the black lines. The red line indicates a preliminary BRT alignment. We have received direction that the BRT will be a gold standard BRT, meaning it has a distinct and separate right-of-way. So the speed of that BRT is enhanced. And then we're also looking at a circulator shown in the yellow line that would connect the project together, so link these districts together. We're also hoping and planning on achieving significant car-free zones within the project. So these are areas that, of course, would be pedestrian only or bike only, which you can see in the red. We have also started to develop massing for each scheme. So here you see a very preliminary massing idea. Just to give you a sense, these are 3 to 5 story buildings, and the next step on this part of the project is to begin to create higher density zones at different portions in the plan. So we'll see some of these buildings bumping up to 6, 7, 8, 9 stories, maybe even a signature building that goes up even higher than that. So this is really just taking the program of 15 million square feet for the project and putting it on the site. Doesn't, again, as Alan mentioned, represent a final direction for either the horizontal design or the vertical design. Number 2 is called the regional hub. And this is the one that we were talking about earlier. This is now extending the catchment or the market influence outward to about a 4 to 5 mile range, which is shown by the white dotted line. So now we're saying, what would the project do if it meant to address some of the missing needs of the surrounding communities of Draper, Riverton, Bluffdale, Lehigh? What type of program would we develop? And that's where that retail and entertainment hub came in. So we also have suggested a slightly higher percentage of open space in this option. So those 2 regional assets would be really the foundation of the regional hub idea. This expanded entertainment and retail and potentially a slightly larger open space element. Here you can see a preliminary configuration for this project, so for this design, so that's now a 55% developable with about 20% open space, but also then the sports park, which is up in the upper left here, would add an additional 8%. So we're at actually almost 30% open space on this scheme. So that means we have to go maybe a little bit higher in terms of the development density. Not a lot, just a little, which may support some of the other ideas that we're talking about. The land use plan for this option is shown here. Again, the basic allocation of office to the east, where you have that great I-15 frontage, the residential primarily to the west, where you have the connection to the river and the views. And you can see here the retail core has migrated a little bit south, and it's actually on this central park that we're proposing that cuts through the project from southeast to northwest, shown here in white. And that central park would also be the regional bike trail and other open space amenities. So the retail and the open space become linked, which you can see in this drawing. So it's, I think, a really exciting idea around a central park with complementary retail uses nearby. And then the innovation and economic development land uses, the office development would be to the north and east of this retail and entertainment hub. Again, here you see the open space configuration and the idea of a larger central park or river to range park. And then that's complemented with smaller, more urban style parks and gardens. This shows the road network, and here you can see the BRT coming through the heart of that office and retail core. So this is a slightly different idea about the BRT. It's actually would run through the heart of the urbanized area, which I think may have some advantages. We have the opportunity for significant car-free areas, and then again a potential circulator for the area. In this option, we did introduce a fairly significant institutional or anchor tenant. Again, this would not necessarily be a university. It may be a combination of different universities, different private companies, maybe even philanthropies or research institutes. So that would be this purple zone on the right. And in our conversations with different school districts, we know that there's potentially a need for a K through 8 school in the residential side of the project. So here you can see what that starts to look like in 3 dimensions. Again, we're going to do a round on this where we start to refine the massing vision for the project and create a little more height and excitement in the massing. The final alternative, number 3, is really economics forward, what we're calling the Innovation Center. And we think what's really exciting about this one is its potential to really impact the entire Wasatch Front, and almost become potentially a third CBD or some third dense core designed piece that would complement Salt Lake and Provo, and maybe have similar university affiliations as Provo and Salt Lake would. You can see that the spacing they're equally spaced, so it does make a lot of sense just in terms of where we choose to invest and focus new growth. So seems like a really, I think, exciting opportunity for the regional impacts. And so the story here really is about maximizing economic potential, maximizing our innovation footprint in the Wasatch Front. So all of the words here kind of support that general idea around the different KVEs that we've talked about. Just quickly to wrap up, the design of number 3 actually has the highest percentage of developable land, about 60%, the lowest percentage of open space. So because of that, we created a different open space strategy that's more based on smaller parks and interconnections between things. We actually, in this option, have moved the institutional anchor south around the prison site. We think that could be a sort of a unique design characteristic of the institutional zone. This, of course, all would have an innovation overlay on it, but perhaps also there's an accelerator in the northeast corner to complement that institutional use. You can see here there's more blue on the plan. The proportion of office and commercial development would be highest in this plan, along with the institutional. Still trying to create a balanced community between the residential and the commercial, but you can see obviously the proportions are different here. But similar organizational ideas around subcenters and cores that would be supported by neighborhood serving retail. And Erin didn't talk too much about the retail in her presentation, but we do need to be sensitive to where the retail goes and how much of it there is to make sure that it's properly supported and viable as a business proposal. 20% open space, as I said, smaller interconnected green areas. The road network is actually somewhat similar to the others, but again, here the BRT would move right through the middle of the core area. So it has a more of a Main Street BRT idea. And what's also exciting about this idea, this alternative, is that the opportunity for car-free zones, pedestrian-only areas is quite enhanced. You can see in the pink. The institutional anchor and school again are shown in this drawing. And then this is what that begins to look like in terms of its vertical development. So you can see a little more impactful, a little more infill oriented and connected to surrounding developments. And the open space again is turned inward and provides relief from this larger economic vision. So those are where we are on the three alternatives. Happy to take any clarifying questions on any of these three.
I'm sure there are a lot of questions and comments. I'm going to exercise a little prerogative and not let this go on too long, because we need to get into the next exercise and make sure we get into some of the details that you'd like to see on the site. But there was a question about parking and how that'll be addressed. Could you address that, Peter?
Yeah, I think I unfortunately deleted the parking slides, so I should have left them in. But there's two strategies we're looking at, I think, or three. One is potentially having a third party build a shared parking structure that takes some of the parking load off of the individual property owners. So we're talking about 6 to 8 of those. And just for scale, a parking structure would generally be about this big in the plan. So you can imagine maybe 1, 2, 3. We're not going to put them everywhere. They're not inexpensive to build, and we don't want to dominate the plan with those. So that's strategy number one. Strategy number two is that you put the parking requirement on the actual parcel owner or the developer themselves, and they meet the parking requirement in the best way that they can. That's probably the most conventional. And then the third strategy that we're just beginning to look at is potentially adjusting parking ratios, looking at parking sharing between, say, a daytime use and a nighttime use. We're hoping that there could be opportunities to reduce some of the parking ratios because of the emphasis here on walkability and the transit connection, the BRT that goes right through the project. So we're in the very early stages of parking, and that's an important metric and design item that we'll be looking at next.
Thanks, Peter. Donna, you had a question.
Yeah, and I've had some time to think about how to phrase this. I know we talked about market impact in kind of what makes the most sense. Have we talked about statewide economic impact over time? So in the first 10 years, how much would the state economy be affected by each one of these scenarios? Have we kind of projected the overall, when you talk about workforce and you talk about companies coming in and those availability, have we, because it seems like economic development is a big focus on alternative 3, but it's mixed more in the other 2. So I was just wondering if we've done that kind of projection.
Yeah, great question, Donna. And maybe I can give a quick answer. The answer is yes, we understand that that's an important piece of it, and it's something that we're working on. We're developing performance measures for each of these scenarios so that we'll be able to, when we go out, have a better sense for how many jobs will be created and what some of the economic impact of each will be, and what the impact on traffic in the area will be, and the costs, et cetera. So that's all under development. So I don't have specific numbers for you yet, but we think it's important when we go out to the public and start vetting these, that it's not based just on, oh, that looks good to me, but what are the trade-offs? And Steve said earlier that there are trade-offs in each one of these. If you have more open space, potentially you use more water. There's a bigger public cost to maintain it and less of a revenue that comes in. So that has an impact on taxes. If you have, as we said, we're kind of learning that a little bit more housing on the site reduces traffic in the area versus a real economic focus. So one of the things that I think we're trying to understand and want everyone to understand is what those trade-offs are, and start thinking, since we can't have everything, what are our highest priorities, and what's the combination of uses and strategies that advances those things we value most.
Thank you.
Let's see, we had a question. So the goals of the three options are quite different, but the mix of residential commercial do not seem to vary as much as I would have expected. How confident are you that those mixes are correct? Just for reference, how would you characterize Sugar House today? Mix of residential commercial. Someone want to take that on? It's really a programming issue. But Steve or Peter?
Yeah, I mean, our core mandate wasn't to set the program, but I think a couple ideas come to mind. One is this idea of a walkable mixed use environment. I think that's an important goal, and we know from just empirical experience that generally a 50-50 mix between residential and non-residential is a appropriate rule of thumb. So I would say we started there. I think, or we didn't start there. That was a point of reference. The actual differentiation is, I think it's 60% commercial on the innovation alternative 3. So and 40% resi, and it's basically the opposite on alternative 1, which is 60% residential and 40% commercial. So we felt the range was about right. I think Ryan could even speak to this. We did get some particular traffic numbers back that talked about 70% residential would have the maximum traffic reduction impact. However, we just felt that relative to the vision of the project that we didn't want to go that high of a percentage on residential.
So let me jump in because I was starting to answer and I realized I was on mute. So sorry about that. So I guess the main answer is we're searching for the right balance. Our CLCO has validated that all of these programs are supported by the market. So now we need to find, the trade-off between economic development and traffic impact and meeting other regional needs. And so that's why these three schemes are the way they are. I mean, you're right. The variation between jobs and housing is about 10% as you march through these schemes. So you have about a 30% difference or so between the first and the third one in terms of the mix of jobs and housing. And we felt that it wasn't dramatic, super dramatic, but it was sufficient to really test, because we realized if we go much below 40% housing, we're going to have much larger adverse impacts on regional circulation. If we go much more than, say, 60% on housing, we're going to start to lose the vision of the economic generator. So we tried to find that fine point where there's enough variation to be measurable. And we've already seen the initial traffic studies on these, and they are measurably different. There's a level of magnitude difference between the first and the third one. So we did achieve that, but yet we didn't go so extreme that we felt we were losing the vision or over impacting the circulation system.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Those are really perceptive questions. And we do need to get to the next piece, but Reed Ewing, you said you've had a few comments you'd like to share.
Yeah, if it's okay. One of the questions has already been answered. Ryan has already apparently done a traffic analysis for the 3 different plans. And I would say that if internal capture is your goal, then alternative 1 is probably the best one. And there's a lot to be said for a high internal capture rate. If you're trying to attract from the region as a whole, you're going to have a lot more traffic, and it's going to be in the morning and it's going to be out in the afternoon, primarily. That creates issues. would like to say, I meant to say this initially, they're all three very attractive. The one that, one other thing I very quickly would say is that I don't think commuter rail has to run through the center, as Steve's plan for Rancho Santa Margarita anticipated. There would be a lot of walking, and it is extremely walkable, but walking is the second mode of transportation and transit is the third. So I wouldn't worry too much about the fact that commuter rail doesn't go through the center. When I think of polycentric development, this is the point I was going to make, I think of something that looks like this. And the density is generally declining with distance. You have these employment concentrations, but they're not, for example, equivalent to downtown Salt Lake City. They tend to drop off with distance, and that is polycentric development in the United States. So thinking of this as a center, and it would be quite a center, I would think that the number 2 is most consistent with what other regions have anticipated for their subcenters. So the innovation district is interesting. I think in some sense, with all the development in Lehigh, we may have high-tech development that's coming to Lehigh. We may have already kind of lost the opportunity to be the innovation district. So if I had to rate them, I'd rate them 2, 1, and 3.
Thank you, Reed. And just before we move on, Ted asked a question of whether we should consider this kind of the higher end of intensity, or if it's more in the middle and there's an opportunity for it to go up or down. Obviously, the market will kind of determine that over time. Our thinking has been that this is a little more on the upper end, although as Aaron said, there's an opportunity that if we do this right, we can increase land values to the point where it can justify further intensity. And I'd say that these scenarios might be a snapshot for where we are today. We don't expect that the site would end up looking like this in full build out. There's a very good possibility that values go up and we're able to be more dense and more intense in the development. And I think that would be our hope, frankly. Let's move on in the interest of time. I think those are just great questions, and you're all fantastic. We do have a couple of more questions that have come in. I don't want to cut anyone off.
What, Ellen? Maybe I can skip forward. Muriel, should I go to the KVE section? Or Leah?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. Maybe we could answer a few last questions while I do that.
Well, I was just going to jump in, if it's okay, and remind everyone that we will be able to, like Alan mentioned, dive into these in a little more detail in the next round of the individual working group meetings. This is to sort of prime the pump for you in advance of those working group meetings. Otherwise, it's sort of like drinking from the fire hose, trying to see all of the scenarios and assess at the same time.
So I think in the interest of time, we'll move to the next exercise, which is going to be an important effort to really get some specific ideas on the table. And as Leah just said, at our next series of working group meetings, those will be broken out by individual working group, and we'll dive a lot more into the details of those areas as we put together thoughts on the preferred plan. But let's see. Who's taking this one and explaining the process to us?
Maybe I could give a very brief overview of what the objective is. So there's 6 key vision elements that have been defined by the working groups. And one of the goals of the planning process is to make sure that these are translated directly into the design of the master plan. the framework plan. So what the design team has done is we've built these pages where we took an individual key vision element. We broke out what we thought were some of the key words in that statement, and these are the summary statements that were provided in the conclusion of the working group document. Things that were interesting to us, or things that we thought really resonated with where we thought the project was going to go. We then translated those into principles, which you see in this middle column. And what we would like to do today is get your thoughts on specific initiatives that would enable us to realize the principle and ultimately have the key vision element manifest itself in the master plan. So the principles are actually fluid. If a group doesn't agree with these principles, we can modify them. But the main objective today is to talk about what the real specifics are of how these ideas would play out on the ground in the actual plan. So that's kind of the structure, and we have one of these for each of the KVEs. So Leah or Muriel, do you want to expand on sort of the process here?
Sure, that sounds great. I'll defer to Liam. I've lost my voice.
That's why I keep jumping in. You don't actually know me. I'm Leah Hermio. I'm helping SOM with public engagement and supporting Muriel's team. And I get to speak on behalf of Muriel today because she has lost her voice. So our goal today is to, like Pete said, really help make sure that we're reflecting what you as the working groups think these key vision elements look like on the ground. They're tangible elements that are included in the plans so that we can help reflect those as we move forward. So Colton, who is our Zoom operator, is going to jump on and give us some instruction. But basically what we'd like you to do is to pick one of the key vision elements. You'll join a room. Pete's got something to say, but you'll join a room and we'll kind of brainstorm through specific things that you think could reflect these initiatives, thinking about the three sort of concepts that SOM just provided to you. That way, so we're going to think about the intent of each of those concepts and figure out how we can make sure that they're reflecting each of these things. When we go into the next round of working groups, we'll dive even deeper. So today is really to make sure that we're in alignment and making sure that these KVEs are reflected accordingly. Pete, did you have something else you wanted to say? You look like you were ready to jump in. Maybe not.
Nope. I'm
Great.
fine.
So we're going to take about 20 minutes and have you work together in the respective room that you're interested in. We'll come back and we'll ask for a report out from each so that we can kind of hear what everyone is thinking about about how the elements work across the design. So Colton, will you explain the process of jumping into the respective rooms?
Definitely. So like Leah was explaining, we have 6 breakout rooms created. Each one covers a key vision element. So from community, transit, economic growth, etc. We have facilitators from SOM assigned to each room. They're going to be leading the charge, presenting, sharing their screen, things like that. Just as a reminder to you facilitators, you've been given recording access, so you can record your breakout rooms, so we make those available afterward as well. But we're going to open those rooms shortly, and then all of you in attendance will have the choice to get into one of those rooms. It'll show up on the bottom of your screen in the Zoom menu. You'll just see breakout rooms, and then you can just join. And then at the end of that session, of the breakout room session, we're going to send a 5-minute warning that the rooms are about to close, and then we'll send a warning right as they're about to close, just so you know kind of the time frame there. But other than that, does anyone have any questions about the breakout rooms before we start those?
Could you explain again how to find the breakout rooms?
Yeah, definitely. So on the bottom of your screen right now, you'll see things like chat, share screen, stuff like that. Once I open the rooms, you'll see 6 options, if that makes sense.
Yep, thanks.
And
are there any instructions for somebody that's on a mobile device to get into a breakout room? Because I'm not familiar with that process.
That's a good question.
I know it's a little more complicated.
It pops up on your phone.
Okay.
So I'll open those rooms now then, is that correct?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So we'll ask that you stay in one room the whole time. And I'll be giving a presentation from the main room for folks who don't choose to opt into the breakout rooms, mostly because we're live streaming to make sure that anyone who's just watching the feed can see what you all are talking about. So I'd encourage you to join a breakout room and not listen to the presentation of things that I'm going to give that you already know about. So please, we really want to hear from you, so jump on in. Hopefully you can see that icon now in the bottom right. It's a 4-square block.
Where are the 4 square blocks?
Toward at the bottom of the screen where you can see the participants or the chat icon. Towards the right-hand side, you'll see reactions, a little smiley face, and then just to the left of that, a 4-square block that says breakout rooms. If you click it, it will pull up a menu and tell you which room you can choose.
What if you don't see your name?
If you don't see your name, that means you haven't clicked on one of the rooms yet.
Steve, we made you a co-host so that you can dive in and out of any of the breakout rooms you'd like. So you actually have more power.
Yeah, we thought you might like to visit more than one and kind of observe and listen to what you were here.
I want to visit all of them at the same time.
Well, we're recording, so you can watch them later. All right.
I wonder if I need to update Zoom or something because I can't see it.
On the bottom, Grant, no squares.
Grant, if you tell us which room you want to attend, we can assign it to you.
That's right.
Give me the day and night one. Oh wait, hold on. Nope, that's it.
Collaboration, sustainability, innovation, economic growth, transit, or community.
Oh.
Community is the one that talked about activity day and night and creating
community then.
It's probably the one you want.
Thanks, Grant.
Can you put me in sustainability? Because I can't figure out how to do it.
Yep, just assigned you both to those.
And Colton, please put Tasha in community.
Okay.
Jared, did the room show up on your phone? Or Jonathan, sorry.
Very exciting.
Colton, let's go ahead and put Jonathan in economic development or innovation. And Jonathan, if you can hear me and have a preference, feel free to indicate that in the chat. Okay, Alan, you should be able to see all of the individuals in the various breakout rooms. It looks like we do have a good representative sampling of all participants in each of the rooms.
We do.
We're happy to assign you to one if that's helpful.
Nope, I'm joining now. Okay.
Great. So for those of you who are live streaming online, I'm going to go ahead and kind of an overview of where we are and how we got here, as well as what the activity is for folks in the breakout rooms. So thank you for hanging out with us today. First, we're going to do a little bit of a recap about the point itself, starting with the people. As you know, hopefully the co-chairs of the Point of the Mountain Land Use Authority are Lieutenant Governor Henderson and Representative Snow. Our board is made up of a number of individuals from across the state who are dedicating their time and considerable knowledge to helping guide this process. The guiding principles of the Land Use Authority are to promote the public interest, set the standard, think regionally, take the long view, be open and transparent, and act with integrity around the way the point is developed. Our staff, Executive Director Alan Matheson, Steve Kellenberg is our planning coordinator. Erin Talkington joined us by phone today. She is our real estate advisor with RCLCO. And Muriel Xochimil with X Factors Communication is our communications manager. Unfortunately, Muriel is hoarse today, or she would be making this presentation to you. The process has been underway for a number of years since 2014 when the Prison Relocation Commission was formed. A new site was selected in 2015 and ground was broken there in 2016. Around that time, the Point of the Mountain Development Commission was formed. They released a vision in 2018. And from that point, the State Land Authority was formed, which basically was tasked with delivering on that vision. The executive director and board were formed in 2019 and 2020. And the real estate analysis that we heard a bit of today from the programs was actually begun in 2020 as well. The folks that you may have seen or heard from today during the earlier part of the meeting are our working groups, and those working groups were constituted in 2020 as well. Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, our SOM, our planning firm, was selected right at the very beginning of 2021 to begin developing this framework master plan. And that's really a guide on how development could look and should look as development moves forward. So it's not a 5-year building site plan. It is a much higher level sort of framework direction of what we want to see and how we want to achieve those goals. So we are here in 2021 developing the master plan, which we hope to have in the summer, and implementation could begin as early as next year. As I mentioned, we are here in March of 2021, and we are really just beginning the concept development process. So the concepts that were shown by SOM earlier in the meeting were designed to start the conversation around what the major focus of the point should be. Should it be its own internal, live, work, play community? Should it be something that fills the gap between the surrounding existing communities? Should it be something that attracts, statewide or Wasatch Front wide or Northern Utah wide? So those are the things that we're looking at and testing right now. And our public involvement process spans throughout the master plan development process. So as we move from March to June, we'll be starting with these early concepts, fleshing them out, refining them, being able to look at trade-offs, different costs, as was mentioned earlier in the meeting. With more regional attraction, you end up with more traffic. With more residential in a site, you end up with less. So trying to weigh all of those balances against some of the guiding principles that the working groups and the board have come up with. So that's where we are, where we're going. Hopefully, if you're watching this live stream, you've been participating in other parts of the point process, but we'll just give a quick recap. That are participating in this workshop today are members of our working groups. There are, 5 working groups. Here we go. Stakeholders, which are really our elected officials representing the cities legislators, folks like that who are representing the public in some capacity here. We have our Education, Research, and Innovation Group, Environment and Air Quality, Infrastructure and Land Use, and Economic Development, Recruitment, and Investment. All of our working group members are volunteers dedicating their time and expertise in their respective subject areas to make sure that we really do meet the best intent for the project to make it something that's really valuable to the state of Utah, to the people of Utah. So the working group's primary tasks were to identify those key vision elements that we saw in the presentation earlier, to identify ways to inform the process, provide ongoing advice and feedback as we develop the master plan, and then to help the authority build relationships with potential businesses, developers, investors, and other folks who might be interested in moving the plan forward, and then to serve as champions of the project. Here are the members of our stakeholder working group. All of the respective working groups and their membership are outlined on thepointutah.org, which is our website. Our Education, Research, and Innovation Group. Our Environment and Air Quality Group. Infrastructure and Land Use. Economic Development, Recruiting, and Investment. So these are the 6 key vision elements that were developed by the working groups to help guide the master planning process. You can see community, transit, economic growth, innovation, sustainability, and collaboration. So the activity today that the working groups are working on right now looks like this. This is one example. What we've done, what SOM has done, is taken one of the key vision elements and highlighted components that really stuck out. What does community mean? Well, it means something that's iconic. It has mixed use that brings vibrancy to the site. We want to focus on healthy living in a place where people can gather during the day or at night, in shared public spaces, with potentially other kinds of residential types. Now, residential type is not a word that you see here under the description of the key vision element, but some kinds of new residential types or housing types are being found to help create healthy living, mixed use vibrancy, and iconic placemaking. So our working groups are working through in their respective topic areas how we might implement iconic placemaking. Does that look like public art? Is that a particular civic event hall or performance space? What is an iconic? What makes a place iconic? Is it a plaza or a building, a piece of art, etc.? So that type of brainstorming is what's happening in the working groups right now. And they will be working through each of these respective categories. You'll notice that they have pretty long descriptions with lots of key or buzzwords. So those are the principles that the working groups are going through. We are recording each of the working group, the breakout rooms, and those will be available online after the meeting. So if you're interested in a particular topic and to see what the working group members are saying about those topics, you are welcome to watch that. You can see it on our, I'll come back to this. You can see it on our website, on our Facebook, Facebook or YouTube. So those recordings, as well as this one, will be available there following the meeting. Also, as I mentioned, we are I think as Alan mentioned earlier, we are very interested in hearing the process. So while this sort of workshop number 2 is pretty much the first public viewing of these early concepts, we do have several more opportunities for you to get engaged. So we will have a survey, a public survey going out here in the coming weeks, a short survey, 5 minutes or so, that is online. And we will also have an open house on March 18th from 2 to 4 p.m. That is a Thursday. There will be the opportunity for more small group work with the general public, any participant who logs on, and also sharing more of the master planning process. And we can also do some one-on-one discussions or Q&A if that's necessary. So for that open house, you do need to register in advance. That information is also on the website. And if you're interested in taking the survey and you're not already on our email list, that's going to be a great place to watch as well. So I'll just reiterate, you can sign up for email. You can visit the website or follow us on any of our social media and on YouTube to participate in that survey, participate in the open house, and additional public outreach and engagement opportunities that are coming a little bit later on. Once we have gotten a lot of feedback on the respective concepts that we're sharing now, as they get more and more fleshed out, we'll come back with a more refined concept, kind of honing it in to one concept that would move forward, and we'll do another round of engagement. So that would be another survey, another open house, more meetings, and other engagement with area property owners, the cities, these working groups, et cetera, to really make sure that we're tapping into what that vision should be. So make sure, if you're not signed up, to get on the email list or follow us at one of these information sources. So with that, I think we're going to go dark for a few minutes until the working groups return. They have somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes of their discussion time left. Don't leave if you're watching, because when they come back, we will ask them to report back on what they heard, what they discussed, what they shared, what they think should move forward. So definitely just give us 5 to 10 more minutes and we'll be back. Colton, would you throw the slide? There we go. Thank you.
Amanda, I
Makes
knew
sense.
that was going to happen. So
It's all good. It's totally fine. I was like, I can't like not say something about the Leo because I love that space. I think it's so great for the community.
I like that kind of thinking too, you know, exploring ideas like that. That's cool.
You know, in our group, Tasha was talking about how this space really is part of the Draper community. And I don't know, Tasha, if you want to continue talking while everybody's gathering back before, you know, Alan or Ted take over.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a lot of open space in Draper. We actually have 5,000 acres, more than any city in the state. So more open space is not necessarily what we need. And we also have many parks. I think there will need to be some parks in here, but what Draper's really looking for here is an economic driver. We are very excited about the possibility of a research facility and about all of the tech potential here. Currently, only about 8% of our population actually works within Draper. We need jobs, and we're hoping that this will be a place with some really awesome employment opportunities.
Let me jump in and so we can move on. And thanks, Tasha. I think it's a really good point, and it's certainly one that's driving us. And as we talk to companies and explore what would drive the economic opportunities, having great placemaking is a big part of that. They want to be in a place where it's livable, where people can go for walks. And so it's finding that balance that increases the value of the site through great placemaking. And we'll be exploring all of that through our efforts over the next few months. I loved kind of breaking into some of these groups and listening to the discussions. They were fantastic. We've got little time, and so I think we'll just ask you to take no more than like 3 or 4 minutes and go have each of the groups kind of share some of the top ideas that you discussed. Maybe I'll start with the community group and ask the facilitator to just share some of the top ideas, if you would, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I can summarize, and anyone in the group feel free to jump in too. So the principles that we were talking about within the community vision were iconic placemaking, mixed use vibrancy, healthy living, gathered day and night, shared spaces, and new residential types. And so I'll start with iconic placemaking. One of the points that came up is that we do have access to such incredible views at the site, and that enhancing and protecting those can be a part of what makes being at the point so memorable. So not necessarily having to create, a flashy new building or space to create the sense of place, but using what's already there and the nature around the site to do that. And then the other idea that we talked about and going through the different alternatives, but that can really further the sense of place on the site is the concept of the car-free streets and zones, and that those can really the walkability, but also create a diversity of spaces throughout the site where people can gather. Then in terms of mixed use vibrancy, the mix of retail we discussed, so having signature retail within the site, but then also, how the public realm supports that kind of mixed use vibrancy. And so having the smaller block sizes and block lengths that enable walkability, and then also having enough density to enable that. Going on to healthy living, one of the real specifics was the idea of incorporating the well building standard into the project. So thinking about how healthy environments within the buildings for people, looking at light, opportunities for physical activity, and everything within them.
And Alex, I'm really sorry, but to get everybody in, if you could just wrap up in a minute, we're not going to be able to go into as much detail as we'd like, and I apologize for that.
No, thanks for moving me along, Alan. Yeah. So gather day and night, we talked about both live music and restaurants and other establishments that are open later. And then for shared spaces, having green or gathering spaces that are located throughout the site and always nearby, and jumping down to new residential types, incorporating micro units or smaller units, and then also within the buildings, incorporating all the latest technology and ensuring they're wired for innovation.
Thanks, Alex. Great ideas from that group. Thanks very much. Okay, let's turn to the transportation transit group.
Perfect. I'll jump in and start talking about that real quick. We decided that it was more of a mobility group because we wanted to talk about a little bit more robust, the various different elements of it. The autonomous technology seems like we're a little bit ahead right now of where technology is, and that we don't want to preclude it in the future, but we also don't want to make it a priority, and that we should be focusing on different things. As well, looking at the BRT, talked about making it more attractive with more TOD elements around it. One way to make it more vibrant, it wasn't felt that in the current condition, because of the mode change that you would have to go through from commuter rail to the BRT, that because of the mode change, we would lose ridership, and that we may not get the ridership that we want out of the BRT system the way it sits. So I think those were some big things that came out of it, and then just getting the right mix of land uses and making sure we have good connectivity for the pedestrians to get wherever they want to through the site. I think that would sum it up pretty good. Steve, would you like to add anything to that?
I was on mute. No, I think you covered. I think it seemed like the biggest tension was the the ability to really optimize the impact of BRT, and the impact of mode changes, and that there was some cautionary notes about how much trip assumptions we make that are transit oriented. So anyway, other than that, I think you hit it.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ryan and Steve. Okay, the economic growth.
Yeah, so our group talked a lot about job creation, revenue generation, how to nurture and attract top talent, and by virtue of doing that, get anchored companies. We did run out of time to talk about some of the other items at the bottom here, but I thought one of the things that was really interesting was this discussion around not only attracting these anchor companies, but also feeding and becoming attractive to the smaller companies that are in turn attracted to those anchors. There was a focus as it related to revenue generation on finding ways, perhaps in the open space, that we could have open space venues that would hold conferences or concerts, both have day and night functions in order to try and maximize the value of those places beyond just their intrinsic value. When it came to nurturing and attracting top talent, there were a couple of issues that we turned a little bit negative here, but one was talking about air quality as a significant downward force on attractiveness of the region, and needing to make sure that we're not we're improving that as a virtue of the development here. And then also an interesting idea about diversity, equity, and inclusion being an increasingly important topic for discussion amongst recruitment and attractors here, and that perhaps the blend of product types that we're looking at in the residential market will help with trying to create a more diverse environment. And then finally, looking at anchor companies, obviously kind of meeting up with a lot of the questions that we talked about earlier about biotech and future medicine, and the interplay with university commercialization was another topic that came up with significant frequency here.
Great substance. That's good stuff. Thank you, Aaron. Thanks to that group. All right. Innovation.
Yeah, so we focused around the 5-6 principles, looking at potentially developing shared core facilities or collaboration hubs, and that what could be a risk is a company growing and dominating the innovation district. So what type of mechanisms or controls do we need to put in place to make sure that we stay diverse? Whether it's a lease covenant or is it more of an incentive, like a rent discount or something. Also looking at ensuring that there's diversity in the types of research and companies that are coming in, but potentially also having focus so that there's almost, I guess, what I would call a brand to it, similar to the Silicon Slopes. Looking at the culture is focus on what we're good at to develop a critical mass so that other companies or startups want to come here. And then what are the different affiliations that need to occur, whether it's with universities or large anchor tenants. And that the ways to attract talent and investment is definitely market driven, but what's important is to lower barriers, and actually there's kind of synergy with the next principle, and that's to eliminate regulatory barriers. So there could potentially be R&D tax credits or an affiliation tax credit. Thinking about design innovation and attracting different people to the area would be shared tools or resources that can foster early stage development, but needing to identify the company that accommodates this, more of an anchor or mature company. And then as far as industry and academic partnerships, I think an important point was that physical university space may not need to grow, but there's more of that cultural and research connection. Does it actually make sense to have university buildings on the site? And then think about, I think a big thing that came out of it is there needs to be a gap analysis, looking at what are the gaps along the Wasatch Front, and how do you either fill those or amplify those?
You know, yet again, a lot of good substance and meat there that we can work through. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think briefly on the sustainability pieces, couple key ideas. The notion of air quality and air emissions keeps coming up, I think, in multiple areas. The idea of the project is really a global model. We have to put the bar high on the sustainability attributes and goals, and then really focus on energy sources, zero operational carbon, electrification, and maybe challenging some of the existing energy models that are prevalent in Utah. So I think really around those three major topics, Alan, were the core items.
Yeah, it's been an active group all through this process and a lot of good substance. Thank you.
So for
finally, collaboration. There's a lot here.
Yeah, so for collaboration, we touched on most of the principles, but to kind of summarize, I think the big thing that we discussed was relating back to what Pete just mentioned, setting up a global model for regional planning and leadership, and really looking into how to connect the point to surrounding area and the region, and to understand what's out there in terms of the plans of the surrounding cities, but not to be limited by that, and try to explore other big ideas for the point. For the green infrastructure as well, how do we connect to Jordan River through the site and to the mountains? And in regards to Utah talent, there was a lot of discussion we had about providing multi-tenant and universities and institutions, and potentially not a single corporate campus that could actually have partnerships with surrounding schools and utilizing research and park campus component to broaden connection to other school and different ages of students, and some ideas about potentially incorporating companies to provide internships and training programs for the students here. And also creating a spirit of collaborative innovation. A good example that was mentioned by Amanda was the Leonardo Museum, the integration of science, technology, art, and nature. So those are kind of the key takeaways.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, great.
We've got some good information here. We're going to take that information, we'll compile it and use it as we continue to think through this process and think about these options. I want to reiterate that what you've seen today in terms of those options is not the final plan, but we're testing a number of different concepts and relationships between different land uses and transportation types. We'll gather a little bit more public input and hope that we can make it informed public input by sharing some data relative to how these different trade-offs work. So you've been tremendously helpful. I've got to tell you, after every meeting I've had with our working groups, I go away feeling impressed, encouraged, and very grateful. And today is no exception. You continue to give us good ideas. You continue to give us hopeful ideas, ways that we can turn this into a community that really helps solve some problems and helps us set a new standard for how we live and how we develop in this area. And I'm very, very grateful for that. This is a significant undertaking. A lot of people scrutinizing what's going on here. Resources are limited. And yet, because we're able to leverage your significant talent and willingness to improve the community, our product is better to this point, and it's going to continue to get better. So can't thank you enough. So we'll let you go. Our next meetings will be the week of March 22nd. Again, those you should have received confirmations of those meetings. We will be meeting individually with each of the working groups and diving into a little bit more detail on some of these issues and how they translate into the plans on the ground. So that'll be kind of fun. Look forward to the next few weeks when we reach out to the public a little bit more. Encourage you to get others to participate. And with that, I just, again, say thanks and look forward to the next time we get together. Take care, everybody.